The napkin had been folded into a square the size of a postage stamp, and Silas Cornish had carried it in his shirt pocket for 51 years, without unfolding it more than a dozen times. On the morning he walked into the bank on Delacroix Street, the napkin was there. He touched it once through the cotton before he pushed the glass door open, the way another man might touch a wedding ring or a scar. Nobody in the lobby saw him do it. That was the point of things you carry over half a century. You learn to touch them without letting the world know they matter. He was 71 years old, and his hands still smelled faintly of the linseed oil he rubbed into furniture that no longer belonged to him. He had built cabinets for 40 years, and pews, and one long communion rail for a church that burned down in a storm and got rebuilt without him. His knuckles had gone thick as walnuts. He wore a gray suit that had been good once and was still clean, and shoes he had shined that morning on the back step while the coffee cooled. He was not there to be brave. He was there to keep a promise to a dead man. That is the whole story, and it takes an hour to tell, because the bank did not want to let him keep it. Silas lived in a narrow house on Bell Street, with a porch that sagged on the left side and a workshop out back that he could no longer stand up straight inside. His daughter Delphine came Sundays and some Wednesdays, and she brought her own daughter's laughter in on her voice, even when the girl herself was off at her college 200 miles away, safe and unseen and none of this town's business. His mornings had a shape. He rose before the light because his body no longer believed in sleeping past it. He put the kettle on the back burner, the one whose knob had cracked in 1994 and which he had never replaced because a man does not replace a thing that still works. He drank his coffee black and standing up at the counter, looking out the window at the workshop he could not use, and he did not feel sorry for himself, because self-pity was a luxury his father had taught him to consider vulgar. Winston Cornish had died in the winter of 1972, 6 months after the thing that put the napkin in his son's pocket. Silas had been 20 years old. He had spent the following 5 decades becoming the kind of man his father was, which is to say, a man who finished what he started and did not raise his voice and paid what he owed the same week he owed it. He had one thing left unfinished. It sat in a coffee can on the workshop shelf, and it had sat there so long that the paper label had gone the color of weak tea. Delphine found the can on a Wednesday in the fall, when she came to help him move his winter coats down from the attic. "Daddy, what's this?" She was standing at the workshop door with the can in both hands, and she had already pried the plastic lid half off, because she was a woman who had raised a child alone and had lost the habit of asking permission of objects. "That's nothing. Put it back." She did not put it back. She tilted it toward the light coming through the one clean pane of the workshop window, and she looked inside, and she went still in a way he recognized, because it was his own way of going still. Inside the can was a bank passbook, the old kind, cloth-bound, its cover stamped with the name of a bank that no longer existed under that name. Merchants and Planters' Savings, and folded inside the passbook, a single sheet of carbon paper gone brittle, a deposit record, and a date. March 3rd, 1971, and a figure written in a teller's slanting hand. "And Daddy, this says $4,000. Her voice did the thing his did, dropped instead of rose. "In 1971. What is this?" Silas took the can out of her hands, gently, the way he took a chisel from an apprentice who was holding it wrong. "That is your grandfather's money," he said, "and I have been trying to figure out how to go and get it back for 40 years without making a fool of myself. Sit down. I'll tell you, but you have to let me tell it slow, because I have only ever told it fast. And telling it fast is why I never did anything about it." Here is what he told her, and here is what the deposit record could not say by itself. In 1970, Winston Cornish had a moving and hauling business. one truck, and his own back, and later his son's back beside him. He hauled furniture. He hauled the belongings of people leaving town and people arriving, and he was known as a man who did not scratch a table and did not lose a box. Over 11 years, he had put $4,000 into an account at Merchants and Planters Savings, dollar by careful dollar, in a town where a man like him was not supposed to have $4,000, and the whole time he had a plan for it. He was going to buy the lot next to the church and build a hall on it, a place for the funerals that got held in living rooms and the weddings that got held in yards. He had the drawings. Silas had seen the drawings. In March of 1971, Winston went to the bank to draw the money out and buy the lot. And the bank told him there was no account. Not that the money was gone, that the account had never existed, that the passbook in his hand was a mistake, or a forgery, or a thing he had somehow gotten hold of that did not mean what he thought it meant. The manager, a man named Gerald Halcombe, had come out from behind his desk, and in front of a lobby full of people Winston Cornish had hauled furniture for, he had told Winston that the bank had no record, and that if Winston persisted, he would call the sheriff, and that men like Winston should be careful making claims they could not prove. Winston could not prove it. The passbook was not proof, Halcombe said, not without a matching record on the bank's side, and the bank's side had no such record. Winston went home with the passbook in his pocket, and the lot unbought and the hall unbuilt, and 11 months later his heart stopped in his sleep, and he was 53 years old. And Silas had always believed the two things were the same thing wearing different clothes. Silas kept the passbook. He tried twice in the years after to raise the matter. Once in 1978, when he was young enough to be angry and old enough to be ignored, and the bank had changed hands, and the new people said they had no records going back that far, and no obligation to a passbook from a defunct predecessor. Once in 1991, when he had a little money for a lawyer, and the lawyer told him the truth, which was that a 51-year-old passbook against a bank with no matching record was not a case, it was a heartbreak, and heartbreaks do not get filed. So he stopped. He put the can on the shelf. He decided the promise he could keep was a smaller one. He would not let the money be forgotten. He would carry the record of it until he died, and then it would be Delphine's to carry or to let go, and either way the bank would never again get the satisfaction of telling a Cornish that his money had never existed. But now, Delphine said, you're going down there. Merchants and Planters got bought, Silas said. And whoever bought it got bought. It's a big bank now, one of the big ones, and it's got a branch right on Delacroix, and I read a thing in the paper. He reached over to the workbench and slid a folded newspaper page toward her. They're doing what they call reconciliation of legacy accounts, old accounts from banks they absorbed. They put a notice. Anybody with a passbook from a predecessor institution can bring it in, and they'll research it. Delphine read the notice twice. Daddy, that's for people who had CDs and forgot about them. Little old accounts. Not $4,000 from 1971 that some manager swore never existed. It's my father's money, Silas said. And the man who said it never existed is 50 years dead. And I am going to walk in there with the passbook while there is a program that says bring in the passbook. And I am going to make them tell me to my face, one more time, with all their computers, that Winston Cornish never had a dime. And if they tell me that, I'll have kept the promise. I'll have brought it in. That's all I ever promised, to bring it in. He did not say the other thing, the thing under the thing, because he had not admitted it even to himself. He did not want the $4,000. He had wanted for 50 years to give it back. He wanted to walk it to the church lot, the empty lot that was still empty, and put the hall on it that his father drew. and let the money do the thing his father meant it to do, so that Winston Cornish's 11 years of careful dollars would finally leave a mark on the earth that anyone could see. He wanted to pay a debt he owed a dead man. And you cannot pay a debt with money a bank says was never yours. That was the promise. Not to get, to give. He went on a Tuesday, alone, because he had spent his life not needing an audience, and he was not going to start. The branch on Delacroix was all glass and pale wood, cold as a refrigerator, with a young man at a standing desk near the door whose job seemed to be deciding who got to go further in. His name tag said, Prather. He was maybe 32, with a good haircut and the kind of watch a man buys to tell other men something. Can I help you find something? He said it the way you say it to a man you have already decided is lost. I'm here about the legacy account program, Silas said. He had the passbook in his hand, out where it could be seen. I have a passbook from merchants and planters. I'd like to open the research on it. Prather looked at the passbook. He did not take it. Took that program's for verified predecessor accounts. Merchants and planters, that's going back a ways. He was already shaking his head, a small motion, well practiced. You'd need documentation, a statement, a tax record, something on our side. A passbook alone, that's not going to be something we can do anything with. The notice says bring in the passbook. The notice says bring in documentation. I'm telling you what documentation is. Prather smiled without any part of his face agreeing to it. I'm saving you a wait, sir. There's nothing here we can act on. Silas did not move. He had spent 40 years being told a thing could not be built, and then building it. And he knew the difference between a wall and a man standing in front of a door pretending to be a wall. I'd like to sit with a banker, he said. The notice says a banker researches it. I'll wait for one. Something crossed Prather's face then, a small irritation that a lost man had turned out to have a spine. He glanced at the lobby, at the 4 or 5 people in the chairs, at the woman at the far teller window, and he made a calculation that Silas watched him make. There's no one available for that today, Prather said, louder now, pitched to the room. And I've told you what you'd need. I'm going to have to ask you not to loiter in the lobby. This is a place of business. I'm doing business. You're holding up a line. There was no line. Silas looked deliberately at the empty space behind him, and then back at Prather, and let the lie sit in the air between them where the room could see it too. And Prather, who did not like being seen, made the mistake that men like Prather make when they are seen. He raised his voice. Sir, I need you to leave. Now. I'm not going to say it again. Get out. The lobby went the way a room goes when something has been said that should not have been said. The woman at the teller window stopped counting. An older man in the chairs put down his phone, and Silas Cornish stood with his father's passbook in his hand. 71 years old, in a gray suit he had pressed himself, and understood that 51 years had changed the wallpaper and the watches and nothing else at all. He did not shout back. His father had taught him that a raised voice is a gift you give the other man, permission to call you the thing he already wanted to call you. My name is Silas Cornish, he said, quiet, so the room had to lean to catch it. This passbook has my father's name in it. I'll come back when there's a banker. And he left, because there was nothing to be gained by the Sheriff Prather's face was already reaching for. But he left slow. He left the way you leave a place you intend to return to. And the older man in the chairs watched him go and did not follow, and told himself it was not his business, and knew it was a lie the way Prather's lie had been a lie. Delphine was furious in the way that is really fear. He told you to get out, in front of everybody. Daddy, you are not going back in there. Kaksikes, I'm going back in there Thursday. when they told me the account specialist comes. He was rubbing oil into a chair leg he had no reason to fix, because his hands needed a job while his mind did one. That boy is not the bank. He's a gate. You don't argue with a gate. You go around it, or you go over it, or you come back when it's open. And if the specialist says the same thing, no record, nothing we can do. What then? You've kept your promise. You brought it in. You said that was all you needed. Silas set the chair leg down. I said that because I have been telling myself that for 40 years, so I could sleep, he said. But you found the can, and now it's out of the can. And I am too old to put a thing back in a can once it's out. I don't want to have brought it in. I want them to open it. Thursday there was a banker, a tired woman named Naylor, who at least took the passbook in her hands and turned it over and looked at the date and did not smile the false smile. She typed. She waited. She typed again. I'm not finding a linked record, she said. Merchants and planters, we did absorb them, but the digitized records go back to '86. Before that, it's microfiche in an archive, and half of it didn't survive the transfers. A passbook without a system-side match, I can flag it for research. But I want to be straight with you. These almost never resolve. There's usually nothing on our end to resolve it against. Flag it, Silas said. Research it. That's all I'm asking. She flagged it. She gave him a reference number on a slip of paper. And as he stood to go, Prather came across the lobby with a second man beside him. Older, heavy-set, a district something, and Prather said, loud enough again, Ms. Naylor, is this the gentleman from Tuesday, the one who wouldn't leave? And in front of the district man, in front of Naylor, in front of the lobby, Prather did the second cruel thing. I'm going to note the account, he said, to Naylor but for Silas, that this individual has been disruptive on multiple visits. So we have a record, since he's so interested in records. Naylor's hands stopped over her keyboard. She did not say anything. She had a lanyard with a child's school photo clipped to it, and a look that said this job was the thing standing between that child and something worse. And she chose, in that second, to keep the job and lose a piece of herself. And Silas saw her make the choice, and did not blame her for it. He had made it himself, once, in 1978. You do that, Silas said to Prather. You put my name in your record. My father spent 11 years trying to get his name into your record. You put mine in for free. He walked out. The reference slip was in his pocket next to the napkin now, 2 pieces of paper 50 years apart, and he did not yet know they were about to become one thing. The napkin, Delphine asked about it that night, because she had noticed him touch his pocket in the workshop, the small habitual press, and she was her father's daughter and missed nothing. He unfolded it for her on the kitchen table, under the light. And it was the second time in her life she had seen it, and the first time she had understood it. It was a paper napkin from a diner that had closed in 1980. On it, in pencil gone silver with age, were the drawings. A rectangle, a door, 2 windows on the long side, a little bell tower, barely more than a suggestion. And along the bottom, in Winston Cornish's careful hand, 4 words. For the ones left. He drew it at the diner the day he opened the account, Silas said. 1960. He carried it 11 years while he saved. When the bank told him the money was gone, he gave me the napkin and the passbook both, and he said, Silas, one of these is the money, and one of these is the reason, and don't you ever get them mixed up. He smoothed the napkin with one thick finger. I've been 40 years thinking the passbook was the money, and the napkin was the reason. But that's backwards. The passbook is just paper. The napkin is the money. The haul is the money. I don't want their $4,000, baby. I want to build the thing he drew. Delphine looked at the little pencil haul a long time. Then we're not asking them for money, she said slowly. We're asking them to admit it was real. Because if it was real, if the money was real, then the church can't say no to the lot. And the people who'd helped build it can't say it's a fantasy. And Grandpa's not a man who made a claim he couldn't prove. He's a man the bank robbed. There's a difference. And the difference is the whole thing. The difference is the whole thing, Silas agreed. And for the first time in 40 years, the unfinished thing on the shelf had a shape he could work toward. And a man who has spent his life building can bear almost anything except a job with no shape. The research took 3 weeks, and in the 3rd week, it came back the way Naylor had warned it would. No matching record located, passbook unverifiable, claim closed. The letter was 2 paragraphs. It used the word unfortunately. It thanked him for his interest in the legacy account program. It said that without a system-side record, the institution could not confirm the existence of the referenced account, and considered the matter concluded. Silas read it standing at the counter with his cold coffee, and he read it twice, and then he set it down and put both hands flat on the counter and stood there. And Delphine, who had come over to be there when the letter came, watched her father's back and saw something go out of it. They said it never existed, he said. Same as Halcombe. 50 years, 3 managers, 1 dead, and they all say the same 4 words. It never existed. He turned around, and his face was a face she had not seen. Not at his wife's funeral. Not ever. Maybe it didn't, Delphine. Maybe I've carried a can of nothing my whole life. Maybe my daddy made a mistake and I turned it into a religion. Daddy, I brought it in, I opened it, and it closed. That's what I get for taking it out of the can. He folded the letter along its creases, precise. A man who could not stop his hands from finishing even a thing that was killing him. The hall's not going to get built. It was never going to get built. I'm an old man rubbing oil into chairs nobody sits in. He went out to the workshop, and he did not come back in for supper. And Delphine let him have the dark, because she knew that some griefs are a room a person has to sit in alone before they can find the door. But she did not believe the letter. She was not built to believe an institution over her own blood. And while her father sat in the dark with a can of what the bank called nothing, Delphine did the thing that neither of them had thought to do in 50 years, because in 1971 and 1978 and 1991, you could not do it, and now you could. She looked for someone who had been there, not at the bank, in the town. Merchants and planters had employed people, and people retire, and retired people talk. And a woman who has raised a child alone learns how to find people who would rather not be found. It took her 9 days. She started with the church, because her grandfather's whole life ran through the church, and an old woman there who had kept the Burial Society books for 60 years remembered the Cornish moving business, remembered Winston, remembered, when Delphine pressed, that there had been talk in 1971 about the bank and the Cornish money, ugly talk, and that a teller from the bank used to come to that very church, a young man then, and that his name had been Ledbetter, and that he had left the bank not long after and never would say why. Roland Ledbetter was 90 years old and lived with his son on the far side of the county. And when Delphine found him, he was on a porch with a blanket over his knees. And when she said the name Winston Cornish, the old man closed his eyes and kept them closed so long she thought he had fallen asleep. I wondered, Ledbetter said, if that was ever going to come and find me. I'm glad it waited till Gerald was gone. I wouldn't have had the nerve while Gerald was alive. He was a black man himself, which Delphine had not expected, and which changed the shape of the thing in a way she would understand later. He had been one of 2 colored tellers, merchants and planters hired in 1969 to keep a certain kind of customer feeling welcome without letting them get too far past the counter. "I posted that deposit," Ledbetter said. "March of '71. $4,000, Winston Cornish. And I remember it because it was the biggest single balance I ever saw on one of our accounts. And it was his, and I was proud of it. Proud like it was mine." And then 2 weeks later, Gerald Halcombe calls me into the back and tells me the Cornish account has been closed to a ledger error, and I'm to say, if anyone asks, that there's no record. And I said, "Mr. Halcombe, I posted it myself. I have got the posting in my own hand." And he looked at me, and he said, "Roland, you have got a good position here for a man like you, and there's a lot of men like you who'd want it, and there is no Cornish account." And I understood him. God forgive me, I understood him exactly. "What happened to the money?" Delphine said. "It went where that kind of money went," Ledbetter said. "Into the float, into the bank, into somebody's numbers at the end of the year. $4,000 from a man they'd decided didn't have the standing to be believed. It wasn't lost. It was taken. And they knew that taking it from him was safe, because who was he going to tell? And who was going to believe a passbook against a bank? I quit in the fall. I never had the courage to tell Winston I knew. And then Winston died, and I told myself the silence was the kindest thing. It wasn't. It was just the safest thing. There's a difference, and I've had 50 years to learn it." He looked at Delphine with eyes gone pale at the edges. "Does your daddy still have the passbook?" "He has the passbook," Delphine said, "and the napkin Grandpa drew the haul on." The old man's face moved. "The haul," he said, "for the ones left. He used to talk about it at the window when he came in to deposit. Every time. $1 and a dream, he'd say, into the same can." Ledbetter put a hand over his mouth for a moment. Then he took it away. "I posted every one of those dollars. I can testify to the posting. I have got no proof but my word and my memory, and I'm 90 years old, and a bank will say I'm confused. But it's the truth, and I have been waiting 50 years for somebody to come up this road and ask me to say it. Take me to whoever it is I have to say it to. I would like to say it before I die." There was one more thing, and Delphine found it because Ledbetter told her where to look. "Gerald Halcombe kept his own books," the old man said. "Careful man, frightened man, underneath, the way careful men are. He wrote everything down twice, once for the bank and once for himself, because he never trusted the bank not to do to him what he did to Winston. When he died, his papers went somewhere. A man that careful, they didn't burn. Find the papers, and you might find the Cornish account written in Gerald's own hand in a book he never meant the bank to see. The papers had gone to a county historical archive, donated by a Halcombe grandson clearing an attic, catalogued and never read, a box of ledgers from a defunct bank of interest to no one. It took Delphine a day in the archive with cotton gloves and a pencil, and she found it in the 4th ledger in a private hand, under March 1971. Cornish, W account closed per instruction. Balance 4,000. Reconciled to house. And beside it, in the same hand, 4 words that Gerald Halcombe had written to himself and never expected another living soul to read. God keep this quiet. He had known. He had written down that he had known. 50 years he had carried it in a private ledger the way Silas carried a napkin, and the 2 men, the one who took and the one who was robbed, had both spent their lives unable to put a thing down. Delphine photographed the page 4 times to be sure. Then she went home to her father in the dark workshop. She did not tell him everything at once. She had her grandfather's blood and her father's patience, and she understood that a man who has just been told his life's belief was nothing cannot be handed proof of it like a sandwich. She sat down on the workshop stool across from him. "You didn't carry a can of nothing," she said. And she told him. Ledbetter. The posting done in his own hand. Halcom's private ledger. The $4,000 reconciled to the house. God keep this quiet, in the thief's own writing, 50 years old, waiting in a box. Silas Cornish listened without moving, and when she finished, he did not weep and did not shout. He picked up the coffee can from the shelf and held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. And then he said the only thing there was to say. He knew. Halcom knew. My daddy went to his grave a man who couldn't prove it, and the man who robbed him wrote it down. He set the can on the bench. We're not asking them anymore. We're telling them. And we're not telling that boy at the desk. We're telling the top of that bank, in a room, with Roland Ledbetter beside me and Gerald Halcom's own hand on the table. And they are going to build my father's hall. How do we get in a room with the top of the bank? Silas almost smiled. You make them want the room more than you do, he said. 100-year-old bank does not want a ledger that says God keep this quiet read out loud on the courthouse steps. You'd be surprised what a door opens when the man on the other side of it is more afraid of the hallway than you are. Delphine wrote one letter. Not to the branch. To the corporation, the head of it, the office at the top, and she did not threaten and did not beg. She stated. She had a passbook. She had a surviving employee who would swear he posted the deposit. She had the manager's private ledger in his own hand, recording the account, its balance, its reconciliation to the bank's own funds, and 4 words asking God to keep it quiet. She had a photograph of the page and the archive's catalog number where the original sat available to anyone. She named a date, 3 weeks out. She asked for a meeting before that date. She did not say what would happen after it. She let the 4 words do that work. The meeting was granted in 6 days. They came to the branch on Delacroix because Silas insisted on it, because he wanted it to happen in the room where a young man had told him to get out. Not a courthouse, not a corporate tower. The lobby with the pale wood and the cold air and the standing desk. He wanted Prather to be in the building when it happened. That was the one piece of it that was not forgiveness, and Silas had decided he was old enough to keep one piece for himself. They came in 3 cars, a woman named Marsh who ran the region, and a bank lawyer, and a man from the office at the top whose title Silas did not bother to learn, and 2 others whose job was to look grave. Prather was at his standing desk when they walked in, and Silas watched the young man's face do the arithmetic of who these people were and why they had come, and watched him fail to solve it, and watched the fear start before Prather even knew its name. They were shown to a conference room in the back, glass on one side so the lobby could see in. Silas had asked for that too. Ledbetter came slow on his son's arm and sat down and put his old hands flat on the table. And Delphine set down a folder, and Silas set down the coffee can. And last of all, from his shirt pocket, he took the napkin, unfolded it once, and laid it in the center of the table where the pencil hall faced the men from the bank. That's not evidence, the lawyer said, not unkindly, looking at the napkin. No, Silas said. That's the reason. The evidence is in the folder. You'll want to look at the evidence, but I put the reason on top so you'd know what you took. Marsh, the regional woman, opened the folder. And Silas Cornish, who had rehearsed nothing because his father had taught him that a true thing does not need rehearsing, told them one piece at a time, with a pause between each so the weight could land. He slid the passbook across first. Winston Cornish. Merchants and Planters. $4,000. March 3rd, 1971. Marsh looked at it. She had a wedding band she turned once around her finger, once, and set her hand flat again. Then Ledbetter spoke. Slow, 90 years old, his voice a dry reed, but every word placed. I posted that deposit, in my own hand. I was the teller. 2 weeks later, Gerald Halcombe told me to say there was no record, and told me what would happen to me if I didn't. And I was young, and I was afraid, and I said what he told me to say. I have carried that for 50 years. I am telling you now, while I still can, that the account was real. I posted every dollar of it. The lawyer began to say something about the reliability of memory across 5 decades. Silas slid the photograph across the table. The private ledger, Halcombe's own hand. Read the last 4 words, Silas said. Marsh read them silently. She did not read them aloud. She turned the wedding band again, and this time she did not set her hand flat. She pressed 2 fingers against the photograph as if to keep it from floating off the table, and the man from the top office leaned over and read the 4 words, and the room did the thing rooms do when the floor of a thing gives way. God keep this quiet. The original is in the county archive, Delphine said. Catalogued, donated by his own grandson, available to anyone who asks. We have not asked anyone else to look at it. Yet. There it was, the one word. Yet. Said the way her father had taught her without teaching her, by 50 years of example, quiet, so the room had to lean. The lawyer stopped talking about memory. Through the glass, in the lobby, Prather stood at his standing desk and watched the backs of the corporate heads bend one by one over a photograph and a passbook and an old man's testimony, and watched the regional head press her fingers to a page, and understood, slowly, that the man he had thrown out had come back with the roof of the building in his hands. Here is what the bank did, and here is what it did not do, because this is a true kind of story and not the other kind. It did not fall. Banks do not fall for one old ledger. Marsh did not weep and confess. The man from the top did not resign on the spot. There was no camera, no crowd, no siren of justice arriving from somewhere else to make it right. There was a conference room and a folder and 3 old pieces of paper, and the slow understanding on the other side of the table that they were holding a thing that could not be allowed into daylight. What they did was settle, quietly, the way such things are done. The bank acknowledged, in a letter Silas could hold, on the bank's own paper, that a deposit account in the name of Winston Cornish had existed, that it had been improperly closed, and that the institution regretted the error and its long consequence. $4,000 in 1971, compounded across 51 years the way the bank compounded everything else it held, came to a number with a comma in it that made Delphine put her hand over her mouth in the parking lot. The bank paid it. It paid it fast, because a number with a comma is cheaper than a ledger read on courthouse steps, and everyone in the conference room knew it, and Silas knew it most of all, and took the settlement not as justice but as the tool the justice required. He did not keep the money. He walked it, all of it, to the church, and he bought the lot next door that had sat empty for 51 years because his father's hall had never been built on it, and he hired men, and because his hands still knew what his father's hands had known, he worked on it himself, slow, an hour a day, until the day his body would not let him climb the ladder anymore, and he sat in a chair at the edge of the lot and directed younger hands instead. They built the hall from the napkin, a rectangle, a door, 2 windows on the long side, a little bell tower, barely more than a suggestion, because Winston had drawn it barely more than a suggestion. Over the door, carved by Silas himself in the last real woodwork of his life, 4 words, for the ones left. Prather was gone within the month. Not fired in a way that made news, just moved, and then moved again, and then not there. The way a bank makes a person into an absence. Marsh, the regional woman, came to the hall's opening, alone, in plain clothes, and stood at the back and did not speak, and turned her wedding band once and left before the end. And no one but Silas knew who she was. And Silas let her go without a word, because he had gotten what he came for, and did not need her shame on top of it. Roland Ledbetter lived to see the hall open. His son wheeled him in through the door under the carved 4 words, and the old teller looked up at them and then around at the room full of people who had come. The funerals in living rooms people and the weddings in yards people. And he said, to no one, to Winston, I posted every dollar. He died that winter, and his funeral was the first one held in the hall, and Silas built the box himself and would not let anyone help. Naylor, the tired banker with the child's photo on her lanyard, sent a card. It said only that she was glad, and that she had quit, and that she was teaching now. She did not sign her full name. Silas kept the card in the coffee can where the passbook had been, because the can had earned the right to hold something that ended well. Delphine's daughter came home from her college for the opening, safe and grown, and none of the town's business until she chose to be, and she stood next to her mother under the bell tower, and Delphine told her the whole thing. Slow, the way it had to be told, from the can to the napkin to the 4 words in a dead thief's hand. And Silas Cornish, 72 now, sat in a good chair in the hall his father drew, and he did not feel triumphant, because triumph was never the feeling he was after. He felt the thing a man feels when he sets down a weight he has carried so long he had stopped believing it could be set down. He touched his shirt pocket out of 50 years of habit, and the napkin was not there, because the napkin was over the door now, carved in oak, and his pocket was empty for the first time since 1971, and empty was the best thing it had ever been. Delphine sat down beside him. He'd have liked it, she said. He drew it, Silas said. I just held onto the paper. They sat a while. Out the 2 windows on the long side, the light came in the way light comes into a place that was meant to hold people, and it fell across the floor Silas had laid with his own hands, and neither of them said anything else, because the room was finally saying it for them. He had brought it in. He had opened it. And this time it did not close. Have you ever carried something so long you forgot it was heavy, and only felt the weight when someone finally helped you set it down? And when you did set it down, was it justice you wanted? Or was it just to finish the thing the person you loved never got to finish? Tell me in the comments about a promise you kept for someone who was gone. I read everyone. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and share it with someone who carries a thing they have never been able to put down. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.